Write complex documents. This comes from the business training package and is BSB WRT 401A, and it makes up part of one of the units that comprises the Certificate 4 in Work Health and Safety. With writing complex documents, there are certain objectives we hope that you're able to complete and be able to perform at the end of this training. First of all, we want you to be able to accurately plan the appropriateness, the purpose, and the format of a document. This is very important because it's essential that we're able to look at various documents, where they fit in, and work out what is going to be the right type of document for any given occasion or any specific task that has to be done. We need you to draft suitable text in preparation for the document writing, which basically means that we need to know how to prepare prior to writing your final copy and understand what's involved in creating a draft. After we've created the draft, at the end of this unit, students should have the ability to review the final text in preparation for the document writing, and then finally produce a document to a standard appropriate for the receiver. And that's going to happen during the nature of the course anyway. You're going to produce all sorts of different documents for a specific receiver. Sometimes it's going to be for the PCBU that you'll be writing for. Other times it might be for people within the workplace or an organisation to have an understanding of potentially a JSA or a hazard and risk assessment, whatever it might be. How do you determine the purpose of a document? Well, there are lots of different documents, aren't there? Report on research findings, writing of manuals for workbooks, making a complaint. There are so many different types of documents that we create all the time, every week. Even a shopping list is a document that we use for sharing information. So how do we determine the purpose of a document? There are tricks that we can show you with this. It just goes on and on, doesn't it? The types of things that you might require. Workplace health and safety situations are no exception. Toolbox talks, compliance forms, legislation. If you sit down and read through the legislation, the Act relating to work health and safety, you'll find that there are so many different types of documentations that are involved and ways that we have to read them for specific purposes. So what's a document supposed to do? There are four main things a document is supposed to do. In fact, any form of communication is used to complete these four main tasks. The first one is to inform. So does your document help on making a decision or reaching an outcome or requirements to be achieved in that outcome? The other is control. So norms and standards have to be adopted within an organisation. The concept of having communication, including documentation, to control a situation is very, very important. And we see that when we put in hazard and risk reports, we're informing there. And when we put in techniques or strategies for controlling the hazard and risk, that is a control measure, and that form of documentation is a control document. The other is to motivate. Sometimes we'll use documentation just to make sure that people know what has to be done, and we motivate them to do the right thing. It could be, for example, the consequence of a particular action on a job site might lead to these negative outcomes. So the document that we're trying to use there is a motivating document. You'll often have that happen in a toolbox talk, where you're trying to motivate your staff to say, here are the actions that we're supposed to take to work with workplace health and safety in an appropriate way. And we use them to express emotion. And that could be a card, a thank you card. It could be how you're enthusiastic to take on a task. It could be that you're cross that somebody has broken a rule or acted contrary to WHS practices within your organisation. These four areas is what communication and documents are supposed to do and cover. So there are four major points to consider when we're choosing or building a document. And so we use the COPE mechanism, which is how do we cope with building documents? First of all, know your clients. If you know who's going to receive the document, think about various aspects relating to them. their age, their level of understanding, the ability to interpret the format of the document. If you're sending a message to a 5-year-old, it's obviously going to be written very, very differently to that you're sending to a 25-year-old or a 65-year-old for that matter. If you're going to send a message to a 25-year-old, it might be appropriate that your document comes in an electronic medium that might be the newest thing that's come out. However, the 65-year-old may not be as comfortable with that medium that you choose, or the format that you choose to send the document in, just as a generalization. Secondly, know your objectives. What do you want the document to achieve? If you don't fully understand the outcome that you're trying to achieve from that document, then you're going to be in all sorts of trouble, because there are lots of different ways, as we said before, of lots of different documents that we could choose. But if you don't have a full understanding of what you want your document to achieve, then anything will get you there. It's like that old expression that if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. The same applies to this documentation. Planning. Have the skills to access and develop the medium you believe is best for your document. So if you're going to make your document come out in an email, know how to use emails and the most appropriate way of sending them out. If it's going to be an Excel or a chart or a map or a series of drawings or PowerPoint, whatever it happens to be, have the skills to use, access and develop the medium that you are going to choose for that particular document. And finally, evaluation. Look for feedback or a way to analyze the success of the document. And what I'm saying there is that if someone is understanding what you're saying, you're going to get those affirmative nods, or you're going to have the task will be completed successfully, or you won't get too many questions saying, I don't really understand what you're asking of me. Because if that starts coming back, then you know that that particular documentation wasn't written or received, or the medium chosen may not have been the most appropriate one to use for that particular task. So evaluation is critical on every piece of documentation that we send, just to make sure it's the right one. Most organisations have gone through this process, and documentations are usually standardised. However, that's not always the case, so you've got to be aware of that. Know your audience. Think about it. If you're working with children, you want fewer and small words, lots of colourful words, pictures, that sort of thing. Tradespersons, you want to use the language that's appropriate. If you're talking about the size of a bearer that has to be used on particular footings, and you've got a measurement that's got to be used, speak of it as a bearer, not just saying that large piece of timber that's going to go from footing to footing. Use the correct jargon that's appropriate. Be succinct. Tradespersons don't want to hear a story, they just want the facts. Give all the information that they require to do the job, whether it be tables, plans, drawings, etc. And think about legal, social, management. There are lots of different audiences that you're going to send documentation to, and you can see by this slide that each one of them have various needs, and the documentation relating to that is very important that you specifically target it to your audience. We talk about social, I mentioned that before, about sending emails, but when we're really talking social to friends, social media, short notes, sending pictures, that sort of thing, that's the kind of documentation that is very appropriate for social. And it's turning out, with the advent of more complex social media, that actually social media is creeping into professional workplaces as well. So what's your objective? The second part of coping with writing documentation. What's your objective? After you've looked at your client, what documentation method will best achieve the desired outcome? We've got a couple of scenarios coming up. Have a listen to them, have a look at them, and then think to yourself what would best facilitate your objective. And there may be more than one. There usually are. So you're asked to pick up groceries on the way home. Should you have a table outlining the goods and appropriate prices? Would you like to have sent to you a plan showing the aisles and where the groceries could be found? It might be handy. Would you like pictures of the items to purchase? Sometimes that could be handy too. Dot points of the desired items, or headings with explanation as to why these are needed. Each of these might be okay, but I'm sure that when we go to the shop, Most of us just have dot points or just a list of desired items that we're looking to purchase. So that's going to be the most appropriate way that the information is sent, and the medium for that will be either a little shopping list or just a pad and pen, or some people these days now write it into their phones or tablets and use that for their lists. Providing evidence for a pay rise. You write a long letter outlining why you deserve the pay rise. Supply HR reports of your attendance, professional development service record, written references from colleagues stating your strengths. You might have dot points of the successes that you've made for the company. You might have an appointment email confirming the time of the meeting. All of these would be suitable to bring to an interview. But be aware of your client. The boss might not want to see any of these, so be prepared to keep some documentation in your briefcase. And I think this is important because there are times we can over-document. I've often heard people say, you can never give too much information. Well, I don't always find that to be the case. Sometimes you can give a little bit too much information. I think in most cases, keeping it succinct is the best way to go. So planning a document. First of all, we have the format. You could have a letter, essay, dot points, table, plans, pictures, a combination of all of these. There's building the documentation. Look at the information. Look at the data, contextualize the data. So when I say contextualize the data, make sure the wording is going to be appropriate to the listener. Collate your material from appropriate personnel if you might need to go around to different people and collate information. And make sure that you understand language literacy and numeracy. And the ACSF stands for the Australian Core Skills Framework. That's the standardized hierarchy of how you use language, literacy and numeracy. And so if we're able to develop our information or our documentation while we're building it, keeping all of these things in mind, you know that it's going to be set up better in your planning stage. Drafting. Make sure that you draft it first. Draft your document. Have a draft text. Think about the wording that you use, the genre, the language. Is it too big? Are you using words that are too complicated? Or are you using ones that are too simplistic? Look at the size of the information, meaning how many words have you used? How much is it to read? Is it too much? Is it too small? Are you using any graphics? Think about that. Have a draft copy of your documentation. I'm sure all of us at some stage have written a letter that we've looked back on and gone, wow, I wish I didn't say that, or I wish I'd said this and put that in its place, or added this to the letter. So drafting allows us to do that more successfully. Finally, editing and the final text. Have someone read over it, a peer review, someone of your same standard, and look at that and have a go at doing this peer review. Do a spell check. Critical analysis is important. When you read your document, look at it from both sides. Look at it as if you were the receiver. How are they going to read it or interpret it? And you, of course, as the writer, you're going to have a particular objective. But how will it be received? And they're important. Your final product. When you design your final product, look at the design elements that need to be considered for a document. Think of the colour, size that you're using, the form, the style. Are you going to use a table? Is it a format that's used all the time, some sort of pro forma that your organisation uses? All of these sorts of things you consider. Very important to think of style guides. Now I want to speak for a little bit about style guides. Every organisation should have a style guide, which is a uniform way that you consistently work with your documentation. It could mean the same footer every time. It could mean your logo always in the top left-hand corner. It could mean you use a particular type of font. It could mean that you have all of your lettering a particular size and a particular colour. All of these things make up the style guide, and it's very important that you're aware that your organisation uses a style guide. If you're a small organisation or a one-person business, still applies. It's part of setting up who we are and what we do. And if we've got something which is perhaps on blue paper, that might mean this is essential reading. And every time we have something which is essential reading, it comes out in blue paper. If we have something which comes out as a list to be shared around different people and signed on the back, that might be a piece of green paper. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But the thing is, if we have something which is standardized and we know is going to be the same each time we do it, that's going to be a good thing. So think about using word processing software with spell check, any artwork that we put in, word art, presentational programs, etc. And finally, check your work prior to production. Very, very important. So, your style guide. As I said before, a style guide is going to vary from organisation to organisation, but it should demonstrate the nature of that organisation. Have a look at the slide that I've got there. Does this slide demonstrate an appropriate use of a style guide? What does this style say about a company? So looking at this one here, where I've got different colours, different fonts, different sizes, it's all a little bit dodgy, really. It doesn't look good and it doesn't look professional. We want to make sure that when we create a style guide, it's going to be something which says who we are. This in front of you now doesn't say much at all, to be honest. It looks a bit disorganised and a bit messy. Create your own style guide for this slide. What works? What doesn't? What do you think on this slide right now you like the look of? Just do this within your head. This is not assessed. But what are the things you're going to look for? How do you ensure that it's used within the organisation? So think about, if you're going to have a style guide, think about how you're going to implement this. How does the style guide represent your organisation? Will it be accepted, and why? Because if not everyone's using it, it's obviously not going to work. Does it represent you and meet organisation or individual objectives? Meaning, what is your organisation trying to achieve, or what is the image they're trying to portray? Does your style guide represent them? And is it reliable and transportable? Meaning that it's one thing to have a bright, glossy, lots of pictures, lots of colours, lots of cartoons to have as a style guide. That's fine if that's what you want to represent. But if all of a sudden you need to have a different client or send something to a different client, can you still use that style guide? Or do you say to yourself, oh wow, I don't really want to send this out because that's not the image that I want to portray to them? Well, maybe occasionally that's okay, but in the most part, it's better that we have a style guide which is reliable, can be used over and over again, and it's transportable, meaning you can use it with any different organisation or any different customer that you're trying to send this information out to. That's the end of the slideshow. Your assessment will be following.